Hey, I'm Pastor Rod. Thanks for joining us today. I hope this message makes a difference for you.
I was raised in church. We went every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and every time the doors were open. I'm grateful for the heritage of faith and relationship with Jesus that my parents modeled. I learned to pray, worship, give, serve, and follow by watching their example. That's the way it used to be. Religious beliefs were handed down from your parents. If mom and dad were Methodists, then you would be a Methodist for life. If your grandparents were Lutheran, then your parents would be Lutheran, and you were Lutheran. If your background was Pentecostal, you would always be Pentecostal. If your family was Assembly of God, then you would always be Assembly of God. Your Catholic family was Catholic for generations. You weren't Catholic or Methodist or Lutheran or Pentecostal or Assemblies of God because you chose to be. You just never considered anything else. That was just the deal. It's not true anymore. Now in ever increasing amounts, people try out different religions in their search for God, and they explore their spirituality like never before. They do much of that exploring online. And I want to caution to you, be cautious, be careful when you seek answers to spiritual questions on the internet. I have seen otherwise smart people led astray by websites that twist truth, make up credentials, and ignore academic standards. Listen to me. Here's the principle. Just because something sounds smart doesn't mean they are smart or it is smart. I was about to use an example. I won't. Just because it sounds like the truth doesn't mean it is the truth. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's right. Can't tell you how many times people have sent me like a chain email. If you'll copy this to 10 friends, Bill Gates will send you $100. And then I reply, well, that's not true. And they say, well, it's on the internet. Oh. Now, you can find people against anything and everything imaginable. You can also find people who are for crazy things. Be cautious. If you're not sure, ask us. We'll tell you it's a scam. One of the challenges with all the religious systems being taught is a tendency to put too much emphasis on yourself. Every religious system other than Christianity teaches that you must attain a certain level of good works or accomplishment in order to go to heaven or paradise. It's about you. If you accomplish enough good, you'll reach heaven. If you don't do enough, you won't be allowed into heaven. So what you do determines where you go. How much is enough? Nobody knows. Nobody can tell you. But one thing for sure, it's all up to you. And it's not intentional, but when you take cues from other religions and apply it to your belief system, it becomes all about you. What have you done? What have you said? How much faith do you have? If you haven't been healed, it's because you don't have enough faith. If you haven't received a financial miracle, it's because you haven't given enough or done enough to qualify. And good-hearted people say things like, if you have this sickness, it must be your fault. You need to examine your life. There must be sin. You're doing something wrong. Or you wouldn't need to have a knee replacement if you had enough faith. I remember a lady who told one of our seniors that. It devastated her to think that she was somehow responsible for her knee problems. 6 months later, that lady who told her that had knee replacement surgery. Well, say you are healed and you'll be healed. Don't admit you're sick and you won't be sick. Just have more faith. Is that really true? Can you confess your way into a healing, or can you confess your way out of a healing? When you say, I have a headache, are you claiming that headache and now God will give you more headache? See, we've been taught to think it's a formula that if you can get to the right faith healer, if you can say the right prayer, if you can give the right offering, if you can go to the right church, if you can go to the right conference, or have the right amount of faith, if you can figure out the formula, God will heal you. I even read a book that taught the right way to pray for any physical problem. It had a list of the physical problems, what you say, where you place your hands, how you pray. And according to the author, if you don't pray the right way, it doesn't work. And I just picture God in heaven saying, oh, that was so close. Nice try, but if you'll move your hand just 3 inches to the right, and if you'll say just something a little different, then I'll heal. Keep trying. One day you'll get it right. Well, today as we start this series on healing, I want to tackle a difficult theological question, hopefully in an easy to understand way. When it comes to healing or a miracle, how much is up to you? How much is up to God? We're going to look at 2 stories in the New Testament, 2 men, each in a desperate situation. To make it easier to follow along, I put both stories in your outline, because if you're reading in your Bible, I'm going to get you lost. Both guys, their only hope was a miracle from Jesus. And by studying their stories and Jesus' reaction side by side, you'll discover some important things about miracles, and I hope relieve some pressure. Mark chapter 10 tells the story of Bartimaeus, a blind man, desperate to see. In John chapter 5, we find the story of an invalid, a man who couldn't move and was desperate to walk. Both men had a need. One was blind, one couldn't walk. Now, it's important to understand the culture in Bible times. Because they were handicapped, they were regarded as subhuman, as a worthless drain on society. Their handicap was viewed as the result of sin. People believed that the invalid couldn't walk and Bartimaeus couldn't see because God was punishing them. People avoided and ignored the handicapped. It was a deep-seated prejudice. Both men had a need. Both men also had a plan. Bartimaeus' plan was simple. He stood by the road, and when Jesus came by, Bartimaeus planned to shout out and ask for healing. The invalid's plan was a little more complex. He staked out a small pond called the Pool of Bethesda. It was a crowded gathering place for people with illness. People believed that an angel came and stirred the water, and that when the water was stirred, they would watch for a ripple, that the first one in would be healed. So when the water began to move in a mysterious way, there was a race to the pool. The invalid's plan was to jump in at the first ripple. There's just one small flaw in his plan. He couldn't walk. He couldn't run to the pool or jump in the water, so it really wasn't much of a plan at all. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. Bartimaeus couldn't go out and get a job, but he had some initiative. Every day he got up early and he went out and he found a good spot beside the road. He spent his whole day begging, hoping someone would have pity and give him a few small coins. It wasn't much, but at least Bartimaeus was doing something. The invalid, on the other hand, was doing absolutely nothing. He was lying on a mat by the pool day after day. He couldn't get up and run. He couldn't jump in the water. He was the picture of a guy wallowing in self-pity. I can't walk. I can't run. I'll just lay here till I die. It's the first big difference between them. Bartimaeus was doing everything he could. The invalid was doing nothing. So who are you like? Are you doing everything you know to do? Or are you like the invalid, feeling sorry for yourself or hoping one day you'll get a lucky break? Have you ever heard the verse, God helps those who help themselves? Isn't that a great verse? There's just one problem with that verse. It's not in the Bible. And it's only partly true. God does help those who help themselves. God also helps those who can't help themselves. When Bartimaeus heard it was Jesus of Nazareth, He began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. He shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus always drew a crowd. For a beggar, that was a good thing. It was a chance to make serious money. But Bartimaeus was completely focused on Jesus, his opportunity for much more than money. He kept yelling, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Bartimaeus ignored the crowd that was trying to quiet him. He ignored all the obstacles, and he kept his focus on Jesus. The invalid did the opposite. When Jesus saw him lying there, learned he'd been in the condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" And I think the best modern day picture of the invalid is Eeyore. Okay, did you not grow up with Winnie the Pooh? All right, Eeyore. "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me get in the pool. When the water's stirred, while I'm trying to get in, somebody goes ahead of me." The invalid didn't even recognize Jesus. He just continued his pity party, all the excuses why he couldn't get better. Someone was always faster. No one is around to throw him in the water. The helpless man's world was defined by a tiny mat on the stones surrounding the pool. Bartimaeus was Jesus-focused. The invalid was excuse-focused. So who are you like? Are you focused on Jesus, or are you focused on your problems and excuses? All the reasons that you're not happy, all the reasons that you won't get healed, all the reasons you can't have a miracle. When Jesus heard Bartimaeus yelling, he stopped and he said, "Call him." It's not on the cell phone. It's like call out to him. So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up. On your feet. He's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, which is a big deal in those days because clothing was very expensive at that time. He didn't even care about that. He jumped to his feet and he came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi," or "Teacher, I want to see." Bartimaeus was full of hope. When Jesus asked what he wanted, Bartimaeus could have asked for money. He could have asked for a better spot begging. He could have said, "Would you just let me talk a minute and take an offering?" He could have asked for a new job. Instead, Bartimaeus went for the whole thing. "I want to see." When Jesus asked the invalid, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir, I have no one to help me in the water when the water's stirred. While I'm trying to get in, somebody always beats me to it. Somebody always goes ahead of me." He didn't say, "Yes, I want to get well. I want to walk." He'd given up. We don't know exactly why this man was at the pool. We do know he'd been an invalid for 38 years. For almost 4 decades, he'd seen through the eyes of hopelessness, waiting for a healing that didn't come. He no longer believed healing was possible. He was an excuse-making, no-chance-taking, hopeless case. What a big difference. Bartimaeus was hopeful. The invalid, on the other hand, was hopeless. What about you? Are you hopeful? Are you believing something could happen? When I talk about this series is on healing, does your heart jump because you think this is your moment? Or have you given up on ever receiving your miracle and decided, I just have to live with this? Jesus called Bartimaeus. Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. When Jesus called Bartimaeus, remember he's blind, he followed the sound of his voice and he pressed through the crowd to get to Jesus. The invalid couldn't come to Jesus. He wasn't physically able to approach. So in his mercy, Jesus went to the invalid. Isn't that an awesome thought? He couldn't approach Jesus, so Jesus approached him. Jesus walked up in the middle of the man's despair and hopelessness and sorrow. What a difference. Bartimaeus came to Jesus. Jesus came to the invalid. In spite of all their differences, both men had an encounter with Jesus. Jesus stopped for both of them. He stopped for Bartimaeus, who was filled with hope, and he stopped for the invalid, who had no hope. The blind man shouted, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." When Jesus came to Bartimaeus and asked what he wanted, he said, "I want to see." And somehow Bartimaeus knew who Jesus was. He addressed Jesus as Son of David. That was a term that meant Messiah. We have to just kind of gasp, but Jesus had done a lot of teaching around the area where Bartimaeus lived. On one of those occasions, Bartimaeus must have been on the edge of the crowd and heard life-giving words. Perhaps because he was blind, Bartimaeus listened better than other people. But apparently sometime, at some point in that journey, Bartimaeus made the decision that Jesus was more than a man, that he was the Son of God. Bartimaeus was a faith-filled believer in Jesus. The invalid wasn't a believer, a follower, or even a casual observer. Jesus was the most famous teacher of the day. Jesus was a figure who attracted attention and brought controversy everywhere he went. Everyone had heard of Jesus, but this guy, sitting by the pool, never even heard of Jesus. Jesus walked up and said, "Do you want to be well?" He just called him sir. I want you to imagine all these sick people sitting by a pool. They're just all surrounding it on the stones. And they're all waiting for something to happen. They're waiting for healing, not knowing that the healer himself is on the scene. The invalid couldn't have been a believer, or he would have known who Jesus was. So, if he's not a believer, there's no way he can be healed, right? If he didn't believe in Jesus, didn't even know who he was, how could he do his part? How could he have any faith at all? What a huge difference. Bartimaeus was a believer. The invalid didn't even know who Jesus was. And Jesus came to him. He's been there on the rocks around the pool for 38 years. And Jesus asked him. He asked them both similar questions. To Bartimaeus, he said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And Bartimaeus said, "Rabbi, I want to see." No hesitation, no doubt. When Jesus came to him, ready to receive. Bartimaeus knew what he wanted. He wanted healing. He came to see Jesus to be healed. The invalid didn't even know what he needed. Jesus asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir, I have no one to help me get in the pool when the water's stirred." Well, I'm trying to get in. Somebody goes ahead of me. Look at them. They all have friends that'll chunk them in the water. I don't. Every time I'm too late. He didn't even ask to be healed. He was just looking for someone committed enough to stay with him and throw him in the water, which, by the way, wouldn't have gone very well. Maybe he thought that Jesus would stay around till the water was stirred and would help him. The invalid was looking for natural answers when the supernatural answer was right in front of him. Comparing their stories, you root for Bartimaeus, don't you? He deserved to be healed. But on the other hand, we're kind of apathetic towards the invalid. But both had an encounter with Jesus, and surprisingly, both of them received a miracle. Now, for some of you, everything you've ever believed about healing and miracles is about to be challenged. But we're just going to stick to the Bible. Look what happened next. First, Bartimaeus. Jesus said, "Go, your," what's that word? Faith has healed you. So, see what Jesus said? Bartimaeus was healed because of his faith. So that must be the key. That must be the secret. If you want to be healed, you have to have great faith, so it is up to you. Even though it's not a Bible verse, it's true. God helps those who help themselves. But now the invalid. After he did his whole, "Sir, I have no one to throw me in the water. Everyone always beats me. I'm just here alone." Jesus said, "You lazy bum. Get a good friend to throw you in." Now, Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat and walk. And then in one of the most anticlimactic ways of telling a story of the whole Bible, here's all we get. At once, the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. Well, wait a second. If faith was the key, why was the invalid healed? He didn't have any faith, right? He didn't even know who Jesus was. Nothing he did brought about his healing. In fact, when Jesus offered healing, the invalid just wanted somebody to throw him in the pool, which wasn't a good plan. I'm surprised he didn't tell Jesus, forget it. I don't want to lose my good spot, and this mat's comfortable. Bartimaeus was healed because of his faith. The invalid wasn't healed because of his faith. The invalid was healed because of Jesus' compassion. Jesus said to Bartimaeus, go, your faith has healed you. Bartimaeus was a believer before being healed. You have to be a believer to have faith. His faith was the key to his healing. The invalid was not a believer before his healing. In fact, he didn't become a believer until sometime after his healing. For the invalid, his faith came as a result of a miracle. Now, this will mess with some of your theology. If you always believed that healing and miracles was the result of faith, how in the world can you explain this? There's only one possible explanation. The love of God. God, in his love and mercy, chose to reveal himself to the invalid by healing his sickness. Bartimaeus was healed because of his faith in Jesus. The invalid had faith in Jesus because he was healed. See, I think of people who struggle with depression. It's really rare that you find somebody struggling with depression but also filled with faith. Those emotions are kind of contrary to each other. Thank God it's not about you. It's not about what you pray, what you say, what you do. He's God. Newsflash, you're not. Now, let me caution you with a balance point and save myself some emails. You could listen to me this far and say, Pastor Rod doesn't believe in faith. He doesn't believe faith makes a difference. If you say that, you are twisting my words and you are misrepresenting the truth. I'm faith-filled. I believe in an all-powerful God who is able to do far beyond all we can ask or think or imagine. And Scripture is clear. Faith is necessary for the follower of Jesus. Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. Anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and he rewards those who earnestly seek him. I believe in faith, but at the same time, I'm thankful that when my faith is weak, God is still able to heal. His miraculous power is unlimited. God's miraculous power is not limited by your faith. And what happens next is amazing. Bartimaeus did exactly what we expect. He left his beggar tools behind and he followed Jesus. The man who restored his sight was worthy to be worshiped and followed. But look what happened with the invalid. The day on which this took place was the Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, it's the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat. Now there's some rule followers for you, huh? But he replied, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. Now here's the most amazing part of the story. So they asked him, who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk? And the man who was healed had no idea who it was. For Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. I can't imagine. I mean, come on, put yourself in the invalid's place. You're crippled and you can't walk. You've been laying by this pool for years. You've lost all hope. you're never going to have a chance to walk again. Then one day, a man walks up and says, do you want to be well? And he heals you. Would you lose track of him in the crowd? Would you let him slip away? Is there any possible way that you wouldn't know his name? I don't think so. You'd grab onto Jesus with everything you got, determined to follow him forever. Now this guy, many people, even though they've been touched by God, they've experienced his love and his power, they lose sight of him in their busy, crowded life, just like the invalid. The invalid lost track of Jesus. And what you think should happen next, the next verse should say this. When the invalid didn't acknowledge Jesus, God made him crippled again. Isn't that how it should read? But not God. Jesus, the Son of God, filled with incredible love we can't even imagine, went to find the invalid again. Later, Jesus found him at the temple, and he said to him, see, you're well. Now stop sinning. Something worse may happen to you. The man went away and told the Jews it was Jesus who made him well. Jesus wasn't just concerned with the invalid's physical condition. He was also concerned with his spiritual condition. Jesus' point was sobering. Sin has consequences far worse than any sickness. 38 years as an invalid was nothing compared to an eternity in hell. 2 stories, 2 guys. Both Bartimaeus and the invalid had an opportunity to become followers of Jesus. Bartimaeus immediately chose to follow. And we really don't know what decision the invalid made. It appears he became a follower of Jesus because he returned to the Jews and told them it was Jesus who healed him, which would not have been a popular thing to do. He didn't have to go back. He didn't have to testify, but he became a witness to the power of Jesus. 2 guys were very different, but both men had a Savior. When everything around you fails, when friends or family aren't available to give you what you need, when your cries for help seem to bounce off the ceiling, God's mercy steps in. Mercy is God's response to misery. Maybe you feel like you've been abandoned and all outside help has vanished. You've tried everything you can think of, but nothing has worked. I've got good news for you. You are a perfect candidate for the mercy of God. When you are helpless and hopeless, God reaches out in mercy. Mercy is available for you.